How are you? How are you,
I'm
John?
good. I'm good. Last week. I was in Denver for DNN Summit. I got to speak. I gave the keynote there. It was really cool thinking back on like
Which summit? Which one?
DNN. So you know .NET Nuke.
Oh, yeah.
Community. And they're it's a really cool community. They're really tight, like family. They're I don't know. I kind of got my start in both some open source stuff and like that was my first I worked in like corporate, back end shops, and then I actually worked in a consulting thing with Phil Hack and some friends, and we built like websites, and we used DNN. So, so it was cool giving the keynote and being able to like kind of call back to some of that stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah, they're doing some.
Someone
new things.
says the sound is good. That's music to my ears. I came in today and Golnaz was like, "We fixed it. It's gonna be perfect. The sound is amazing." And I'm like, "Okay, I've heard that before." No, but someone says the sound is good, so that's good.
That is exciting.
We do have. We'll let the viewers in on a secret. You couldn't hear us when we dialed in before, so we had to change. You're currently running through a different microphone. You're using the crappy little camera microphone up there to hear us, but that doesn't affect anyone watching the stream. So whatever you're going to do. So I was on vacation last week, so we were just talking about this. I was in sunny Hawaii, wondering why people go skiing when they could go to the beach. And maybe that's because I'm Australian. Maybe that's just because I'm not a skiing person. I have skied once, but there's all these people here that I know, very good friends of mine and neighbors who are. It's midwinter break, and they're off skiing, and they're like, "Look at us skiing on the mountain," and it's minus 27 degrees Celsius, and I'm not even kidding. And I'm sitting in 27 degrees Celsius on the beach or on a lounge chair, and Mickey Mouse is handing me a Mai Tai, and I'm like, why would you go skiing when you could be here? So I don't get it. But all power to people who like skiing. I think, John, you like skiing.
Yeah, well, so I do like skiing. I did a good amount in the past, but I was looking at the lift tickets that were clipped on my. First of all, I had to dig through the garage to even find my cold weather clothes, and then I got one of the tickets said 1998 on it, and I'm like, yeah, it's been, I've skied maybe 4 times in the past.
Wow.
15 years. So, and I think maybe part of why I don't mind the cold is because like I'm in San Diego, it's hot all the time. So I don't mind like for a couple of days every, few years, like bundle up.
See, juxtapose that with what I dealt with the week before my midwinter break to Hawaii, where no one was at work here and my kids were at home because we were all snowed in under 4 feet of snow. And I had to dig out my driveway every morning for 3 or 4 days in a row. So yeah, we just weren't that interested. But some people went and saw more snow because, this is great, let's go get more snow. So what are you going to do? That's all right. So it's been a while since I've been on the show. Have you?
It has.
Yeah. I think we had Glenn on talking about API stuff, and I think we had another Blazor update, and we had, something else. Who else have you had? Who have you been talking to while I've not been here, John?
Yeah, that's mostly been it. We've teased a David Fowler show, but something keeps coming up.
He can't commit. That man cannot commit. I tried to rope him in today, but he wouldn't come.
Yeah.
All right.
And I'll be like, hey, how does Standup next week sound? And he'll be like, yeah, sounds great. And then I'll be like, okay, it's tomorrow. He's like, oh, I can't do it. Like, oh, come on. So
it looks like Jeff has bumped us off the Visual Studio Twitch channel again.
Is what?
So the Visual Studio Twitch channel is now hosting C# Fritz again, which it was before this show, and then we started streaming and we took over. But now he's back in there. We're not on Twitch anymore.
Now that's weird. I'm seeing. I think I still see us on here. Are you sure you're live?
I'll hit F5. Now I see us. Okay, I don't know what happened. That's weird. Maybe other people experience that as well. Just hit F5 and it'll all be fine.
All right.
All right, do you love the community, John?
I always love the community. Let's do this.
Let's do it. Let me find the button. They've moved the buttons around. That one. Yay! There you are.
Hooray! Okay. In the spirit of community and excitement and all this, we have coming up this Visual Studio 2019 launch event.
Okay.
And community-wise, why that's important is we've got worldwide events. These are in partnership with our meetups. So, hey, if you're developing ASP.NET, there's a good chance you're using Visual Studio, Visual Studio 20. Are you using Visual Studio 2019 a lot?
I am pretty much exclusively, because the things I'm doing in VS today, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is sort of experience reviews for all the Core 3.0 stuff. So I am exclusively in preview.
Yeah,
2019.
I am too. For the most part, the biggest kind of jarring change for me, or just something to get used to, is the brand new experience. The file new, or just opening up.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's fine. It's cool.
Yeah, so we've yet to integrate all the ASP.NET Core and .NET Core stuff into that the way that we want to. That won't happen until further along in the .NET Core 3 sort of milestones. So right now, you have to choose. I mean, it's like it always has been, right? You choose ASP.NET Core application, then you get the one ASP.NET dialog where you then choose other stuff. And we don't want that to be the way moving forward. You should be able to type in the new search experience and say, hey, I want to build an API, and it should filter and give you the API template. That doesn't work today, right? So a couple more months before we'll get that type of stuff working. But yeah, the other thing that's jarring me actually talking about this is the C# editor has new colorization. And I mean, it's great, but my brain still can't get used to the fact that like instance methods are all brown now. I use the normal theme, not the dark theme. And like my keywords are like magenta, like if and else are magenta. And then other keywords are blue, and the method names are this brown, like I said, there's brown, and static methods have a different color. It's very colorful. I'll put it that way. And so I'm still, my muscle memory, my eye memory, my ocular memory isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Interesting. Cool. All right. So let's see. Scott Allen, interesting post from him here. He's just kind of looking at, and this is actually something that came up, I'm talking to people last week at the conference. Some people are just like still struggling with dependency injection. And here he kind of makes the case for and explains why, like by looking at comparing an MVC, like an MVC 4 or 5 controller, and looking at the user manager, and then comparing that. So here he's looking at, here's how things were registered, and then you use the ON context, and it's kind of service locator pattern. And then he talks about like, hey, look at, you've got trade-offs with everything, but the code gets simpler with ASP.NET Core.
Right.
So, just kind of a nice little reminder. And for people that are kind of like put off by that, I think it is good to kind of, look at, it's not, I think what you folks did with baking in dependency injection in a nice way into the startup, and then just everywhere, it's just available everywhere. I think to me, it feels like if dependency injection is something I have to wire up myself, and it's only in places that I've hooked it up, it's less useful. But because dependency injection is everywhere by default, it's like it's just part of how you develop now.
Yeah, we took a bet, right? Like we took a punt on it. We said that it's not that we kind of baked it in and gave you good support. Like it is the foundation of the hosting model. Like the container is the foundation of everything, and you get a container for each host, and everything has to be configured in there for our frameworks. You want to use MVC, you want to use middleware options, or you can create instances of options and pass them to middleware directly, but the web server itself is in the container. Kestrel is in the container, and you can't change that if you're using ASP.NET Core the way it's designed to be used. So yeah, we took a big bet on it, and I think it's worked out. So
yeah, I'm a fan. Cool. Let me see. Scroll to the top here. This is interesting. This is one of those little hidden features of ASP.NET Core I didn't know was there. Scott points out, if you have something that's maybe dynamically setting a content type for a download. So say, for instance, in a database or it's, file system, it's something generated on the fly.
Right.
You need to set the content type.
Right.
Otherwise, let's say I want to download a PDF and I set it wrong, then I'm going to get gibberish,
Yep.
right? So you can go through and you can do a switch case and you can try and do it yourself, or you can use the built-in. So I didn't know this was there, the file extension content type provider. And this is just a feature, and he links over to it. And as you can guess, it's just, a huge case and every single file type that you may need. But this is so much better than wiring it up yourself. This is something where it's pretty complete and it's going to be maintained. And
if there's something there that's missing, send a PR, log an issue at the minimum, or even better, send a PR. And yeah, so I think the list was initially built using the list that's in IIS, and then we've extended it, over time. So
yeah, I got to see this history. Maybe
well,
I don't.
The history is destroyed because we moved to Mondo repo. So you could go to the static file, the old static files repo, which is where it used to live, and you'd be able to see the history there. Oh, no, it's gone, actually.
Okay, cool. So this is interesting. And this is one of those kind of like, I didn't think of doing this, and maybe it's useful and maybe it's not. Interested in your thoughts. So here Gunnar Peetman set up an ASP.NET Core application running on Windows Sandbox. So Windows Sandbox is this built into Windows 10 now.
It's not out yet, right? Isn't this in like super uber previews? Let's be super clear, right?
Well, yeah. So if you're using one of the what do they call
Fast
it?
ring or something?
Builds, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So but it's on the way.
Okay.
It's interesting. So you enable this feature. I think it's mostly useful for if you want to test out, like say you have some sketchy, I don't know, something you download off the internet, some exe, and you don't want to screw up your machine. You want to test it first, or whatever it is. Or maybe it's just like some, I don't know, line of business stupid app you got to use, but you don't, whatever it is. So this allows you to get kind of this lightweight desktop isolation. I think it's mostly useful for like a desktop app, but here he's showing using this for running an ASP.NET Core application. So here he shows, he's building these kind of batch files. He's doing self-contained deployment, and then he's running it, and he's got here's his ASP.NET Core app running here. Now, from my thoughts, this might be useful for kind of testing out a self-contained deployment, making sure that it'll work, because here you have kind of the isolation from the base. So kind of similar to Docker, but then I'm not sure why you would use this over just using Docker. So I don't know. It's
Well, Docker doesn't give you anywhere near the level of isolation that this will give you, right?
I guess so.
Right, because Docker's containers by themselves aren't a security boundary like this is.
Yeah. So anyhow, interesting as it gets closer to shipping. This is something to. Yep. All right, Steve Gordon, man. I mean, just continue to watch. He's cranking stuff out. It was nice to see him at NDC London recently. Here he's taking an early look at gRPC and ASP.NET Core 3. Hopefully one of these days we'll get like David Fowler on and we can get,
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, but so here he's explaining, gRPC, a schema-first framework from Google, supports service and communication over HTTP2. The thing that he points out here is that it's specified using this kind of proto file, and then based on that, both client and server can generate a lot for you. So proto based on protobuf, and then he shows wiring up on this is pulling in the two things he's pulling in here. One is the actual kind of tools, the packages there for that, and then you also including a link to the protobuf or to the proto file there. So then he goes through and wires up the server. Not a whole lot of code here because it's sort of self-describing.
Yeah.
Because of that schema. And then here he generates a client. This is a here he's got Kestrel for serving and HTTP2. That's nice to see. And then he's generating a client down here. This is the client. So I think for this he used a console app.
Yep.
And pretty lightweight here because they're both using that same kind of.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Contract, I guess. Kind of, right.
Yep.
So then, that's basically it. Kind of a quick look at going through and setting it up.
Yeah, I was going to show that actually today. So.
Well, that's great. So I gave a little teaser, and then you can dig in.
Perfect.
Great. Okay. Thomas on the Elma blog. Actually, a lot of good posts here recently. This is one I picked out. This is an interesting thing of what if you have several people on a team and they're all pointing at different, databases for whatever reason, or they have individual settings that they need to do. So there's a lot of different ways you can go through and do this. His example from an app settings JSON perspective. So here he starts by talking that through and pointing out what if you have different settings you want to do. One approach here is using environment variables. So, go through and just set it directly in an environment variable on each machine. Mm-hmm. That's user specific and something you've kind of got to go and tweak every time. Here's something he shows also is using just like an individual, like appsetting.yourname.json file. And then using this, apps environment machine name and basically pulling that in. Mm-hmm. So then, just using the kind of standard you know, app settings system, it just pulls that right in, right? So that's an idea. It's already easy to do things like you've got support for production and, you know, staging and all that using app settings, but you can also use your own machine name and just do, you know, this kind of thing here.
Yeah.
So nice little tip there.
Cool.
All right. So Ankit here posting about using Google Cloud Firestore as a backend for a Blazor CRUD app. So Google Cloud Firestore is one of these kind of cloudy, you know, very lightweight data stores.
Is it literally the one they bought and then renamed? Is it Firebase?
No, I think so. Here it is, console.firebase.google.
It's Firebase.
Yeah, there you go.
So they bought Firebase, right, a few years ago, and now they've integrated it and called it Google, what do you call it? Something Firestore?
Cloud
Firestore. There you go.
You know, that was confusing me a bit before because I was like, Firestore? I thought it was Firebase.
I think it's the same thing.
All right. Probably right. So so here just kind of a walkthrough going and I'm not going to go through all of this, but basically steps on how to go through and talk to the back end. This is an example that, you know, it's kind of common for some of these single page application systems to just, they don't even, since you're just talking to a back end anywhere, they can, right? They can talk to a cloud provider for the back end.
I wonder if it is the same thing, or I wonder if it's a different, I'm just reading the docs. I haven't looked at this before. Because it's interesting that screenshot you just showed, it had two options. One was real time and one, real-time database, which is what Firebase was so, you know, famous for. And then it has Firestore. Oh, it's the next generation. There you go. It's the better one. Yeah, this looks like it's the new Firebase. In fact, if you go to the website, it's like it's firebase.google.com/docs/Firestore. So it is Firebase. Okay, cool.
Okay, Shahid here, he continuing his mega series. Here he's looking at handling errors in ASP.NET Core. This is a soup to nuts on handling errors. So he starts with basic error handling in C#, like just the basic error handling try-catch stuff, building all the way up. So looking at, and I'm kind of going to skip ahead a little bit here, error handling in MVC, reminders about the error model and error view. So, you know, and customizable, of course.
Yep.
A reader pointed out, you know, also looking at web API and kind of global error handling or global errors in web API, and then also looking at error handling in Razor pages and similarities and, you know, kind of minor differences. Then he goes through and talks about logging errors. So this is kind of everything. A great reminder just on error handling in general.
Oh, that's good. So, it's interesting. We just did an experience review of some stuff in 3.0 in the meeting before this. And one of the things out of that I have to log is we're going to make some improvements. The improvements we wanted to do for a while around the exception page and the error handler middleware there, where like we still have that issue where if you're doing, for example, API development and you throw an exception, you get back the developer exception page, which is HTML, if you've got that configured in the development environment.
Right.
And by default, our controller that we add to those project templates for doing the error handling in the production scenario just doesn't, you know, it just returns a view. And I think the API one doesn't do anything special at all. And so, which is unfortunate because we have problem detail support now, which we added in 2.1 and 2.2, we improved it. And so we have a proposal for how we can hook all those things together in 3.0 so that both the developer exception page and the error handler middleware can work in conjunction with other things in the system so that a thing can register and say, hey, I can handle exceptions. Please call me back if you see an exception. Give me the context and give me the exception, and I'll tell you whether I can handle it. That way it'll make the system a lot more pluggable, and one of the things we'll be able to achieve is, if the client doesn't support HTML, we won't return HTML. If it was an API that failed, we'll do coneg for you and we'll run it through a formatter. We'll do a problem details response, which would be in your template, would be in the app. You return a problem details or an exception, and then it'll run through the formatter pipeline. You'll get the right response for the client that's calling. So we're actually going to fix that in 3.0. That is what I'm asserting today, hopefully.
That's great.
Yeah.
I was trying to think when I saw that most recently, and it was when you and I were both doing that workshop in London, and we were debugging things in the kind of debugger page. What is it? The Swagger debugging page. And like if something's not working, you get your response, and it's a bunch of ugly like stack trace that you're trying to read, and it's formatted in HTML, and it's in text, and so there you go. I would love to see that updated. Cool. So good job, Shahid. That's awesome. This is from Philip, and here he's talking about a few tips on handling JSON requests in ASP.NET Core. This is kind of a down to the metal one a little bit, it seemed like to me, but he's talking about some things like don't buffer to string, don't do sync. He goes through some specific things in here for Kestrel for disabling synchronous I/O.
Ooh, there's a history to that if you want to hear it.
I would love to.
So synchronous and asynchronous I/O, right? Like we all hopefully by now understand the difference, and if you don't, then making a synchronous I/O is where you make a call to some system that does input-output over the network or a database or a file, and you block the thread until that has finished. Asynchronous I/O is the same thing, except instead of blocking the thread, you release the thread while that I/O operation is running, and then when the I/O operation finishes, the system will schedule your completion, which is usually the rest of the statement after the await keyword in C#, to run on a thread. It may not be the same thread, it'll be a different thread, it'll get scheduled, right? And the thread pool will handle that. Okay, so the problem a lot of the time with async, and we've talked about this in the talks that David and I have done, and also David has a great repo with a bunch of examples of these things that can trip you up, is that sometimes you can end up doing synchronous blocking I/O even when you don't realize because of the way that certain things get wrapped. So for example, if you might be writing to a response stream of some sort and then you intend to flush asynchronously, or you're writing asynchronously, okay, but then it hasn't actually flushed yet because of the way buffering works, and then you don't call a discrete flush async, you just kind of let it happen, and then the thing unwinds and then eventually it gets disposed, but dispose is a synchronous call. And so you end up having data in the buffer that hasn't been written yet to the underlying stream because you went through a structure that will be disposed eventually and you didn't explicitly flush it ahead of time. So the dispose call actually makes a call to flush async and blocks on your behalf, which you didn't realize, right? And so those type of things make it very difficult to say, yes, I've moved all my code to async, and I'm not, and hence I will not hit any of those scale issues that occur when I have an async system that hits a synchronous code path. Because the problem with synchronous code paths over asynchronous code path, especially when it's like async over async, as we call it, is that instead of using one thread to complete the item for that period of time, you can actually end up using multiple threads, like 3 or 4 or even more, depending on how deep the stack goes, to do the same amount of work. And so you end up saying, instead of running out of threads in time n, you can run out of threads in 4 or 5 or 6 times quicker than you would have otherwise done because of the way these things interact. And so in 2.0, I think it was 2.0 or maybe it was 2.1, I had asked the team whether we could literally disable synchronous I/O in Kestrel by default. So that if you tried to call write instead of write async, right, it would throw. Or if you tried to read from the request body, because that's also a huge security problem, because if you're making blocking calls when you're reading request bodies, if you don't have limits on those calls, it can be very easy for the client to block a thread indefinitely, because they can just send a byte like every 30 seconds, depending on what your limits are set to. And then you can just like easily use up all the threads on the server. And things like slow loris and other types of attacks that do this. And we have protections in Kestrel now to do, we did all that back in 2.0 and 2.1, as you recall, which is why it's now supported as an edge server. So I said, why don't we just block synchronous I/O by default in Kestrel? So they tried. They added the feature. You can see it here. The problem is when we set it to true, very few things worked. So anything real, as soon as you plugged in MVC and you tried to read a JSON request, because the JSON serializer itself is synchronous, it would end up blocking, and it would end up trying to read synchronously from the stream. Because the way it works is you create the JSON serializer, you pass it the request stream, say, here, I want you to deserialize from this stream, and then it reads from the request stream as it's serializing, right? But it doesn't do it asynchronously. It just calls stream.read, effectively. And so you end up getting a synchronous read even though you were going through the right mechanisms in the framework. And the JSON serializer just wasn't the only one. There's a whole bunch of places that end up doing this. So fast forward to today, we're actually looking to turn this on by default in 3.0. And we've systematically worked through all these areas that have that prevented us doing it last time, and one of them being building a new JSON serializer to ensure that we can have a good experience out of the box that and have synchronous I/O turned off by default. I'm not saying you won't hit a problem. Like, we still find things in the framework, our customers find things in the framework, and we get them fixed for the next version, where some API that looks like it's async ends up going down into a stack that is actually doing a synchronous block on top of an async API, which is really bad, and that causes massive scale issues. And in this case, it would mean it would potentially, depending on what it was doing, it might just fail, might just throw an exception, because Kestrel will go, nope, you tried to call synchronous API, we're not going to let you. So anyway, that's the long story behind that particular flag and why it's still set to true today, but we're trying to get it set to false by default.
Okay. Yeah, funny. I was kind of debating, like, is this a good one to show? And I'm so glad I did, because there we get all that information and context. Yep. So good stuff. Okay, two more. We've got one from Andrew Locke. So most of the time his have been pretty in-depth lately, pretty advanced. This is a great kind of overview of ASP.NET Core Razor pages. This is a good intro for if you or your team is not using Razor pages or is more used to MVC, and this kind of explains the thinking. And I like he's got lots of great diagrams in here, kind of mapping what you end up doing with a with MVC. You get this kind of proliferation. You get all this mapping of views and controllers. He talks about also the issue with mapping a lot of different actions. And so then, just kind of explaining the thinking through, when you'd use Razor pages. He talks about how the model works. And he also later on talks about mapping different routing and then mapping different verbs. So just kind of a great overview. If you're like, in addition, there's already good documentation, all that kind of stuff. But I feel like this is a really clear explanation of if you're used to MVC, if you're comfortable with MVC, right, and you want to understand, I feel like this is just great.
That's great.
Yeah, Andrew's a very clear writer. He is good at kind of breaking down complex topics and being very technically correct, and yet also very clear and concise. So
it makes me happy that people are still taking the time to write these type of posts about Razor pages, given it's been around for a year or so now.
Yeah. Look what I just noticed here.
Dark theme. That's just too cool. It's too cool.
Beautiful. I love too. You know what he did there? It's not
faded
immediate.
Too, right?
That's just that kind of. Details. That's nice. That reminds me. Sean Wildermuth used to. I may still have on his blog. When he very slowly turned to look at you.
Yes, he had an animated GIF as his profile picture, right?
So nice. Okay. Did I? I think I may have featured two from Gunnar. I'm not sure. Gunnar Peatman here. This is on automated date-based versioning for ASP.NET Core assemblies. So you've done this in the past where you're stamping into the footer of the page, like actually on the live ASP.NET site it does this.
In the comments, if you actually go to it now and you go into the source of the homepage, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff in HTML comments in the source if you do view source down the bottom.
Let's do it. This is Inception here.
Yeah.
View page source.
Yeah, go right to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, and then zoom in on that block right at the bottom.
And I've copied this. I did this on the .NET Foundation website too.
Okay.
Super.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of hacky, took me 3 months code to figure out how to get all that stuff. So.
Yep. And I stole it.
Because that's what you do.
Yeah. But what he's doing here, I think this is a little bit kind of this is a nice approach. Here he's doing using Azure DevOps, and he's versioning based on the date. And so what that ends up giving you is a nice little your version that that you're stamping is like 2019 0207.1.
Oh, that's cool.
And so and it's incremental by day. So you'll get if you have multiple builds in a day.
So he does that as the assembly version.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with that. With regards to what you apply that to. I think for applications, it's probably perfectly fine. But for libraries, if they're used on .NET Framework and things like that, assembly version has semantic meaning when it comes,
Sure.
once you throw strong naming and all types of other stuff in the servicing and blah, blah, blah. Most of this stuff applies more to the stuff that we ship than it does to the general public. But assembly binding, binding redirects and all those type of things that many folks complain about all the time, because when it works, it's fine, and when something goes wrong, it's horrific. Those things are based on these versions, and so you want to make sure you think very consciously about what you're using for your assembly versions. As I said, for apps, typically it's fine. You can change it every single build, and that's generally the right thing. That's what you want to do. So the other way of doing this is that rather than putting it in the assembly version directly, which is what he's doing here, you can put it in the assembly informational version, which is just a text field. And then you can put whatever you. And so, for example, the libraries that we ship from Microsoft, the assembly version generally matches the branding version. So 201, 202, 203, using semver as close as we can for the component. And then the information version, we stamp in the NuGet package version, which can be different, because if it's a preview, the NuGet package version will have -preview on it, which you can't put in the assembly version, right? Because the assembly version is a .NET idiom. It's a thing. It doesn't support previews and semantic versioning to that extent. And then there's an extra field that we use to stamp in, I think it's the assembly description, we stamp in the Git char. So we use a series of different fields to do so. What's nice about some of these fields that you may or may not know is that if you have the assembly in Windows Explorer, you can right mouse click on the assembly, go to the file properties, and then there's a tab that shows you all of these things. And so you don't have to crack it open in ILDASM or anything. You can just look at it in Explorer and you can see the assembly version and the informational version, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I think that's the details, the assembly details.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. So that's useful to know. And so here, like you said, if you're sitting at the top of the stack, then you can version it the assembly here. Nice kind of pretty output there. So
cool.
Yeah, very cool. And I think that's it. The last thing here is the view source.
Cool.
Yes, I'm done loving the community for today.
I'm all loved out. There's no more community love to give, he says. Quick, someone write a blog post and put on. Well, so what have we been doing? So I have switched, we shipped 2.2, right? That was in early December, which was kind of my focus for a while. And then you and I, and a whole bunch of us actually went to London, and we did NDC London in January. And we taught our famed workshop. No, we taught our workshop. It was a new version of our workshop. We updated it for 2.2, which took us some time to do, which was good.
Effort. Well, we did also some things that really should have been done even for 2.1.
Yes.
Like I feel like we updated some stuff. The better data loading, that was really cool.
Yep.
That's something that's been kind of halfway for a while.
Yeah, I think David and I took a year off last year in terms of teaching and traveling, and so other people had updated the workshop as part of delivering it, and so we got to see some of those updates for the first time, but we didn't apply the updates that perhaps we would have as the feature owners go in and know about those features. So it was good to get back in there and go, oh, well, no, let's change it to do this and this and this, and we updated the material, and then we had a good workshop. I think we had like 17 people, was it? 16?
Yeah, about 17 and really good interaction and everything.
Great interaction, and it was a different sort of group to last year in London. Like last year, I think it's fair to say we had folks who were somewhat quite familiar with .NET Core. Generally speaking, we always have a few newcomers. This time, out of the 17, I think like 15 of them were all .NET Framework developers who hadn't really done any .NET Core yet, and they were enterprisey style developers coming from all over Europe, and so it was a very different vibe, and it was really good. So we had a lot of those sort of, well, how do I do this in .NET Core questions, and why did we make those changes type questions, and folks sort of seeing a lot of the changes for the first time in anger in this type of space. So, and then we had a couple of people who were a little more advanced, and so they offered a different perspective, and we got different questions from them. So it was a really, really good. I think it was a good iteration of the workshop that we've done. And then because it was that type of crowd, we ended up not even getting through all the modules. I think in the full 2 days, we ended up getting to the end of module 6. But there's a 7 and an 8, and we didn't even get to that. It's designed to work that way. So it's designed that you can cut it off at the end of a module.
More than enough.
Yeah, more than enough
send them
content.
home with homework.
Exactly. So and I think it went really well. And there's still things about the app I would change, and we will continue to do so, and we'll teach it again. But it went really well. And then we did a couple talks I don't know if you'd share this in the previous ones at all, but most of them are live now, which I think yours went live this week. I tweeted it yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't. I'll include those for next week.
Okay.
Those, all of our talks are.
So all the NDC London talks are now live. Both the ones that we gave as Microsoft employees, but also all the speakers who gave about various topics, which is great. So I gave a talk with David on ASP.NET Core 2.2. And then David gave a talk with me, as in he led the talk, and I was just there to offer comments every now and then about why your ASP.NET Core application won't scale. And that was kind of a follow-up talk to the one we did last year about all the issues you might run into with async and scaling and how the thread pool works and la 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 la. So that was a lot of fun as well. And then you gave a talk titled what was it called?
I called it ASP.NET Core 1 hour makeover.
Makeover, that was the term I was looking for.
Yeah, it's kind of, I gave a similar talk in NDC Sydney, and I've been continuing to evolve it, and it's kind of what you do the first hour after file new project.
That's cool.
So some things like, features to turn on, setting up, your health checks and your unit tests, some things like I converted the JavaScript libraries over to use libman and showed, kind of basic libman usage. The funny thing is, I kind of build up this thing over the course of an hour, showing all these kind of ways to set up and, tweak make it your own, right? Turn on features that are, off by default, but you probably, there's likely you'll want to use. And then at the very end of it, I show how to create your own project template. Using the template system. And so it's a really cool, like, hey, we just spent an hour, but look how we can shrink it down, and you can, reuse this. And right as I was showing that, my computer restarted. It wasn't even a blue screen. It just restarted. It wasn't a Windows update. It was just for the heck of it. And I have not had my computer do that in maybe years. I don't remember my computer just spontaneously rebooting. So I didn't get to show my grand finale.
That is super unfortunate. So we had a lot of other. I'm sorry, but so we had a lot of other talks. I actually had another workshop. We ran 2 workshops for the first time from our team.
Blazor.
So we had a Blazor workshop for the first time. And this wasn't a Razor components workshop, like the stuff for shipping and throw. This was a genuine Blazor workshop. And so we had Steve Sanderson and Dan Roth and Ryan Novak. So the architect, the lead dev, and the PM for Blazor, the inventor as well, teaching a workshop, which was cool.
I got to say, they put together a really solid-looking workshop too. I mean, it's very professionally.
Cool yeah. It's like a pizza delivery app with a real-time drone delivery of the pizza and stuff. And then they gave talks as well. So I think Dan gave a talk on Razor Components, which is the stuff coming in 3.0, and then Steve gave his now very polished Blazor talk, which kind of introduces Blazor and what it's all about and why it exists and how WebAssembly works and all that type of stuff, which is cool. And then Hanselman gave his a version of his hacking diabetes talk, I think, and he gave a version of the Microsoft Open Source Journey talk as well. And then who else? I saw Mads gave a talk about C# stuff in C# 8. I think Philip Carter was there. I don't know what he talked. I'm assuming he was talking about F#. And who else was there? Who else was from the team? Bob.
Bill Wagner?
Bill Wagner, sorry, did another C# talk. And then, who else was there? There was a whole bunch of us. Seth Juarez was there. I don't know if he did a talk. Did he do a talk? Rob Connery was there. I believe he did a talk as well.
He did.
Yeah, so there was a lot of good content this year, and then obviously there was a lot of great content from the non-Microsoft speakers as well, as there always is. So those videos are all up on YouTube now, and I think you can get to them through the NDC website as well. You can just search on YouTube to do so. So that happened, and then now my focus is really on 3.0. So we've shipped, 2 previews? We shipped the second preview while we were there. The third preview is imminent. It was going to come out this week, but I think it's been delayed because we had a build issue or something. So they're hoping now third preview will come out next week. And our intent is to get a preview out roughly every month. And I think there's going to be a blog post coming out very shortly that talks about this for 3.0. We want to be a little bit more open. We tend to have a little back and forth with marketing. It's like, how open can we be about when we plan to release? Well, we want to hold some stuff, and so we try and come up with words that keep both sides of the company happy. But if you just watch GitHub, it's pretty. You can usually figure out when things are going to happen. But we're going to have quite a number of previews for 3.0. So if you think back to the 1.0 days, we had like 8 betas, I think. We called them betas back then, before we did the first RC. It'll be more like that for 3.0. We're going to try and get a preview out pretty much every month, right? So we had the first one in December, we did the second one in January, the third one was going to be in February, which is this week, but I think we're going to miss it by a few days. It'll be early next week. And then I think the fourth preview might be very soon after that, because we don't want to then leak into the VS 2019 launch window, which is, I think you said is April 2nd. Is that right?
Yeah, April 2nd.
Right. And so then preview 4 will be probably before that. Probably before, maybe it'll be after it. We'll see where it lands, but there's a sort of a few weeks there where we're kind of not, it's not in our best interest to try and land a preview in the middle of a huge launch, right? And then after that, there's a conference, and so maybe we'll have a preview for the conference, but I wouldn't know anything about that. A conference that begins with a B that we hold here in Seattle.
Yes.
And then there will be more previews after that, and then we still intend to try and get 3.0 finished later this year. I think we're saying like late Q3. So Q3 means the third quarter of the year. So sometime from July to September, but late. I don't like saying summer. Sometimes we do the North American thing or the Northern Hemisphere thing. Right. Say coming to you in fall or coming to you in late summer, and that's not very friendly because there's half of the world that doesn't have the same seasons as us. So late Q3 is what we're currently shooting for. It's not a promise though for 3.0. So the next preview 3, I have a build. It's not the build because there's a bunch of stuff held up in the build system right now, but I have like Friday's build, I think, and Friday's build has some stuff that's worth showing. So let me switch over. And some of you may have seen Fowler has been tweeting a couple of these things, a few snippets, and like generating some excitement, which is great. So let me show you some stuff. So we've all seen the file new in VS 2019 by now, and if you haven't, you have now because it's right here. I'm going to click Create New Project. So this is the new, what they call the NDP or the MPD, the new project dialog in VS. And it's very much different to what it was before. Rather than a huge tree view on the left, and they're trying to simplify it and just give you a list and let you search. We have not properly integrated with this yet, and we will do that as part of the 3.0 wave, but 3.0 does not ship with VS 2019. Now, that should have been obvious based on everything I just said for the last 5 minutes, because you just got finished saying that VS 2019 will ship on April 2nd, and I just got finished saying that .NET Core 3 will ship in late Q3. Those are obviously different dates. So if you did think they were going to land together, I'm sorry, they're not. They were never intended to land together. And so we will integrate into this experience better after VS 2019 ships, right? So, because for example, if I type Razor in here, you get some stuff. Like it just says you can build an ASP.NET Core web application. That's because it says create Razor pages. But if I want to find something like gRPC, which I know exists now, there's no template for it here, which is a lie. There is actually a gRPC template, but it's hidden behind the one ASP.NET dialog. So I have to go in and say ASP.NET Core web application, hit next, accept these things, and then I get the one ASP.NET Core dialog where we have a further set of templates, right? A slight refinement on what you selected. So we are going to basically move all of these templates from here into that first screen. Well, not all of them. We might do some consolidation, but generally speaking, so that these will all interact with the new experience. So there it is, the gRPC service that we talked about. We're also going to take a chance to rename a lot of these, and we'll reorder them because it's all a bit higgledy-piggledy right now. We haven't really given it the attention it needs to yet at this stage. You can see that this one is using the same icon as empty, which is probably wrong. And Razor Components is higher than web application, which is also probably wrong. Oh my goodness, is that a Hansel man I see conjuring before us? Oh!
I was at the dentist.
You're at the dentist?
Yeah.
Look at you.
I have to go regularly to the dentist.
I was supposed to go before I went to Hawaii, and you know what happened? We got snowed in, so I didn't get to go, and I have to reschedule.
But you go to the dentist like every 9 years.
No, it's changed now. I go every 6. I have been every 6 months now, twice in a row.
Do you remember when you told me that you hadn't been to the doctor in like 26 years? What did I do? I recoiled in horror.
You did recoil in horror, and I'm happy to say that I went to the doctor in December. and I was supposed to go for my annual that I hadn't done for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then I was supposed to go to the dentist for my cleaning 2 weeks ago, but I got snowed in. I have to reschedule.
And did the doctor, he or she, say that you were the pinnacle of health?
She did actually give me that type of summary, which is nice. But I'm supposed to have my blood work done. I haven't done it yet, so I have to go off and schedule my blood work just to be sure.
I want to see your blood work.
Yeah,
I go to the doctor weekly, which you think may be overkill.
Well, I'm not going to judge. Well, I'll judge you silently. But I've lost 20 pounds in the last year, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
I was told that I am as healthy as a very thin ox. Very frail, fragile ox that moves gingerly.
That's fantastic.
Indeed.
Yeah, so
okay, please continue.
Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge your presence here. All right, so back to what I was talking about. So we have, so we've got some work to do on these templates yet, but they are there. In the next preview, you will see a couple new things. We added Razor components in preview 2, but we now have gRPC, and we have the all-powerful, all-new worker service template. So we're basically introducing a completely new workload type or project type. We call them workloads internally. Like, well, what workload is that? Is it WinForms or is it mobile? Is it Xamarin or whatever? So worker service is an acknowledgement that there is a type of app that you build that is a console app, but has more. You don't just want a console app. That's like do everything yourself, right? Like it's a console app that uses the power of all the ASP.NET Core Microsoft extensions stuff. Okay. So here I am inside my program, in my program file, and I've got my create host builder, and instead of create web host builder, which is what we had in 2.1 and 2.2, and so this all looks kind of the same as an ASP.NET Core app, right, at the moment, except there's no startup class because I don't need one because it's not as complicated. And I just go into configure services, and I've added a thing called a hosted service. Now, hosted service is not new. We had those before. They were just not very well known because we didn't have a template for it. There's only minimal docs. But this is an acknowledgement that there are architectures where you have many of these styles of apps. They don't have a server in them. They sit in a Kubernetes pod, or they sit as an Azure function, or they sit as a VM, or just an app, a web job maybe in Antares. And they sit there and they go, every 2 minutes, I'm going to wake up and check to see if there's any email to send from this database table. Or they subscribe to an Azure table storage queue, and they go Azure storage queue, sorry, and they go, oh, I'm going to dequeue messages, and I'm going to do some processing. I'm going to send it over to this other thing. Or they react to storage changes using Event Grid in Azure, or whatever it might be. The point is that they're apps that are long running. So you want lifecycle for them, you want dependency injection, you want logging, you want configuration, you want all the goodness that we did for ASP.NET Core, but they don't have an endpoint.
You said file new worker service,
Worker
right?
service is what we're calling it right now.
But then you say hosted service here, but then you name the
thing a worker. So
I find that confusing.
That's a perfectly reasonable and valid feedback. So let me pull it apart a little bit, and I'll explain why that is, but then you can tell me that that's garbage and we should change it anyway. So the worker in this case is the thing that does the work, right? In this case, so my worker class is in this project, and this worker doesn't do much. It just sits in a while loop and asynchronously waits every second and then prints out a message, right? It's the most basic worker you could do in the world. The hosted, the hosting part, this part, add a hosted service. This is a primitive of our DI system. So, and our hosting system, the application hosting system. So you can say in DI, I want you to add a class that conforms to a particular interface, and in this case, it is it's background service, and background service implements iHosted service. iHosted service is simply a class that's registered in DI that will get notified about the lifetime of the application. Okay, it's as simple as that. So it is a service that is hosted by the host. So that's kind of the very core layer, and then you can build multiple workload types on a hosted system. So we build web apps on this same hosting infrastructure, okay? And then we build worker apps or gRPC apps or signaler apps, all on this same hosting idiom. So so we know there are customers today using web applications that have hosted services in the background that just do things in the background of the web application. It doesn't make them worker apps. So this is more for, the term worker is more being used to describe when you have a specific application that's job is just to sit there and do a thing that isn't be a server.
All right, so then let me ask you this. If I just want to make a .NET Core app that's a console app,
yes,
that I run as a human occasionally.
Yes.
But it's not hosted.
Correct.
But I want all of the love.
Yes.
is that considered a rare thing?
No, not
Or
at
would
all.
I
You
just
could
need
totally.
to-
So, I mean, you could totally do that here, right?
Okay, but there's nothing here. I would still have to emotionally work past the understanding of what a worker is, what a host is, and then accept that I just won't be using that stuff. So then the question is, why don't you take the DI bits and make that less ASP.NET-y and make it more .NET Core-y?
So we did. So we did that from the beginning, right? So the thing you have to remember about DI, though, is that DI implies a lifetime. So who is hosting the container?
There you go. There's my
Who is
answer.
hosting the container? And so
Right.
it's
And
very
if the
different.
console is, well,
That's right. So we have you could take in dependency injection as a dependency, because it kind of sounds strange, and just use it directly. It wouldn't be very pretty. It's really intended to be hosted, and that's why we have a hosting
if I go file
thing.
new console app and I just want dependency injection for tidiness.
That's difficult because who's going to activate your types? You tend to have a framework that understands. You need a host. You need a hosting paradigm. You need an application model. So this is the application model for these types of applications. If you wanted to build a console app that boots up, does some work, and then exits immediately, but you wanted DI as the composition model for doing that, you could do that with this. You would just have to hook up the end part. You would have to have a trigger.
This is in preview 3?
This is in preview 3.
Lovely.
So this will be in preview 3.
I'm surprised the chats aren't louder. I want to hear what the people in the chat say, because I think this is extraordinary.
Yeah, and so again, we kind of intend, what we're seeing customers do this already. And a lot of this is about acknowledging where customers are already. So I've said, we're introducing a new workload, blah, 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 blah. What we're really doing is codifying what people are doing already, and then looking at what they're doing and just making it better. As in saying, well, we're going to reduce some boilerplate by building some idioms for you in the platform that do that, and just recognizing this is the type of project that people do. So when we talk to customers who have large sort of distributed / microservice-y style architecture applications, you will often end up with projects or applications running in that system that do this. They just sit there and they dequeue from some type of event griddy thing, and then they post to a SQL database, and that's all they do. This is that. This is for those type of things. All right? And I'm sure that people will look at this and, as you just said, go, well, if I pulled apart this bit, though, I could use it for this other stuff as well. Greatness. That's fantastic. We may not have a template for you out of the box that looks exactly like that, but now we've got one more that is much easier to get going with than starting with a console app, like you said, or starting with a web app and then removing all the web stuff, which is not much fun. All right, so the other new one I wanted to show quickly was gRPC. And so, John, you showed that blog post, which is great because it was published today by, who was it? Was that Steve?
Steve Gordon.
Yep. So here it is, gRPC. So what we're doing with gRPC, for folks who don't know, gRPC was a thing put together by folks at Google, and the G stands for Google, and then the rest stands for RPC, and it effectively combines a bunch of technologies into a stack. And so you get HTTP2, which gives you a single connection with lots of multiplexing and goodness, so that you don't have to have lots and lots of TCP connections to do simultaneous RPC calls. And then it uses protobuf, which is the binary serialization format, and then .proto files as the specification for the message types that you go forward and back with. So if I create one of these, and there is a gRPC solution for .NET today. It's just it doesn't use any ASP.NET Core stuff. Like if you go and get gRPC.NET today from Google, it's a thin veneer of managed code that calls out into all their native libraries. They wrote it in C.
Right. It's the Win forms over the top of P invoking of Win32. It's not idiomatic.
And not even done as anywhere near as integrated as that, right?
Yeah, it's quite light. Almost like they code-gened it.
Yeah, and that was the philosophy. And so what we've done is customers are already using gRPC, or they're asking, what should I use for RPC? Because there's no WCF in .NET Core. And so we're like, well, let's embrace something that's already out there and doing really well. And so we're actually working with the Google folks, and we're building stuff that is going into their repository. So if I go and look at the dependencies of this project over here, so this one, at the moment, this template creates you both a server and a client, because gRPC includes a tooling story as part of the stack that generates you the server code and generates you the client proxy or the client agent to call that server. Okay, it's very tightly coupled, because again, that's why it's RPC. It's not HTTP and plus JSON style loosey-goosey, right? It's very much, I have a client, I have a server, there's a contract, and I just want them to work. Okay, it's a little more like DCOM or the old style WCF with a TCP binding and strong service contracts and things like that. So in the NuGet here, we see a bunch of Google stuff, and then here's the one that we're building. So gRPC.ASP.NET Core.Server, that lives in the gRPC repo, but we're building it. Okay, and then we're helping them with the tools part of it, and we're offering improvements and working with them on that to integrate this as well as we think is possible into the idiomatic ways that you would do so in a .NET project, right? Using MS Build and all that type of stuff. So how does that work actually here? So what that means is that this is an ASP.NET Core application. If I go to program, it's the same type of stuff we saw before. It's using a web builder, and it has a startup class. If I go to the startup class, it is middleware. You can see the middleware right here. And then I have in my routing call, which is the new endpoint routing in 3.0 that we've talked about a couple of times. Let me just zoom in a little bit here for you. Then we've got this map gRP service. And so I've got a strongly typed service, my greeter service, which is right here, which is a class in my project, which is in the services folder. And it inherits from the generated code that the gRPC toolchain created for me from that code base. Now, I'm getting an error because I haven't built it yet. And that code doesn't exist until the toolchain runs, and it doesn't run yet until I build. And so this is a slight experience glitch right now. So that's something that we look to improve. I'm just going to shift F6 to build. And then in theory, it build succeeded. And then now you can see my IntelliSense errors have gone away because that base type now exists. If I F12 on that, you'll see it goes into a file that very much looks like it's been auto-generated. And if I hover over the file name up here and zoom in, you'll see that this file actually is a C# file, but it only exists in the obj folder, which is an ephemeral folder in the .NET sort of build mechanics. So if I clean, that goes away, right? And it says, do not edit this. It was generated by a tool, right? Classic thing. So my code lives in this class, startup, so I can edit this to my heart's content, and it's all good as long as it derives, sorry, where I lost my code, as long as it derives from the greeter base. And this is all I have to do. I've got my say hello method, which is overriding the one that was generated for me, and then I implement what it is that I want to go ahead and do. But this is running in ASP.NET Core. This is gRPC as an ASP.NET Core middleware. So it's using Kestrel's HTTP2 support, okay?
And where is our code? Forgive me, I'm
No,
a
it's
little
fine.
bit turned around. We wrote the better wrapper, and it's in 3.0 now,
So-
or it's in a NuGet, or it's in some code I didn't see?
So this is releasing as part of 3.0, and it will be
Okay.
and it will be in a package though. It won't be in the 3.0 shared framework, but the template will be in the 3.0 SDK. So this is going to be a supported offering for as far as I use .NET Core 3. Great, there is a gRPC offering in .NET Core 3. It is composed of code that was both written by Google and by Microsoft. Okay, and the way it's implemented here, rather than it being a console app that boots a server that is a thin managed veneer over a native server that Google wrote in C, it's booting Kestrel. It's booting ASP.NET Core, which has a middleware defined.
It's doing the right things that we would expect as core
It's
people.
gRPC and ASP.NET Core. Now, the other solution still exists, and Google will still make available their .NET gRPC mapping that doesn't use Kestrel and doesn't use ASP.NET Core and doesn't.
Did we call them and give them a heads up, and they're like, yeah, cool, good job.
We're working with them. So they meet
okay.
regularly, more than once a week.
Cool.
Yep. So this is very much they're like, more love the better. They have implementations for everything on the planet, and so well, great, we'll build an ASP.NET Core implementation and we'll give it to you, and we will ship it in .NET Core 3 as a pre-canned template.
For people that aren't using gRPC right now, what's my most likely use case? Is it they're already a bunch of backend or
so the
services?
so the typical use case, as I understand it, is for when you're doing process-to-process communication. So IPC, like inter-process communication, or distributed communication between machines or between processes running on either machines, and you want a strongly typed contract-based RPC style of invocation. So you could do that, obviously, but not have any of the things I said at the end. You could just do HTTP plus JSON and do RESTful, but that's not contract-based. Or you could do GraphQL, right? But then you use a separate tool chain to figure out how to generate the clients. And gRPC gives you an end-to-end. So it's like, I start with the proto file, which is here. So if I go back, this is what you start with. You define the messages. And we don't have text mate coloring. It's coming. So in an update to Visual Studio before we ship, you'll get colorization for this, et cetera, et cetera. But you define that I will have a service called a greeter, and it is an RPC call that has a say hello method that takes a hello request and returns a hello reply. And then I've defined hello request and hello reply down here. Okay, and then the tool chain takes this proto file and generates a server and a client in the language that I ask it to do so. In this case, it's generating me a server in C#, implemented on top of ASP.NET Core, and a client over here, which is very similar to what you showed, John, in that blog post, which is a .NET Core console application that manually invokes the generated client classes.
I feel, as someone who started in DCOM and before that RMI,
yes.
everyone remembers Java's remote
Yep.
method invocation.
And Corber and all the other things, right?
I have mixed feelings about this, but it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and again, reality is, this is, again, a part of us meeting customers.
Hey man, sometimes you gotta do a remote procedure call.
That's exactly right. And
sorry, my webcam is having a
it's a little glitchy. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. I gotta plug it in and unplug it again.
Are there any comments? Because I'm showing you, I can't see if there's any comments that people want. Anyone asking questions about this?
gRPC integration is great work. We like it because it helps us do our job. It's not glamorous like a web server platform. Background services for the win.
Okay.
Both of the people who are still listening love it.
Nice. Very good. Very good.
They're so quiet. I think that, let me just give you a little bit
This
of
week is
feedback.
pretty
My friends who are on the comments here. We could have 1 million views and we would all go, oh, good job, 1 million views. But if we had 100 good comments, we'll even like that even more. We want engagement. We want to talk to humans. So anyone who wants to put a comment and just say hello, we appreciate you more than the anonymous views of the other 80 people who decided to show up and then leave, and they just left YouTube streaming while they went home.
That's true.
You know, what's nice too is people say, hey, I didn't understand. Can you go back over that part? Or why would I want to use this? Or that kind of stuff. It's great interaction.
Yeah. So I was just going to see if there was anything else I wanted to quickly show you that's interesting in Preview 3. Let me just have a quick...
So, question while you're doing that.
Yeah.
So this is similar to like the web jobs kind of feel too. Is there?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that. So for the worker, you mean specifically? Yeah. So the worker template.
Sorry, that's going back.
Yeah, going back. So the worker template, in its first prototype, used the Jobs Sdk. And so we toyed around with the idea of actually embracing the Jobs Sdk and using that as like the working model and improving it and stuff. We haven't done that yet. So we went there and then we pulled out a little bit when we kind of spoke to that team and we looked at it and we decided, well, maybe it's too much to give all that straight off the bat. And also it has a non-cloud agnostic name. It's called Azure Web Jobs, whereas nothing Azure about the SDK at all. The SDK will run anywhere. And so it was just a bit of a mismatch. And so we said, let's start with a basic worker template that describes this type of, that lets you start with this type of workload. It's a console application that uses our hosting model with our configuration DI extensions, etc., our background hosting thing, and then we can explore adding more stuff. The eventual long-term goal, I'll let you into a secret. The eventual goal is that you'll start with a worker service, and then you're like, okay, what I want this worker service to do is run some code when this file changes on my Azure Blob Storage via Event Grid, right? That's what I want it to do. And so, but you need a gesture for that second part. Creating the empty template with the infrastructure I showed you is pretty straightforward. Adding the Azure specific stuff with all the config and pointing to your subscription and like what file you're monitoring and blah, 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 and what package do you have to add because you need to know the right one with the SDK in it. That part is the bit that is complicated today. And you have to go and read a bunch of docs, and then you're not really sure if you read the right doc, and then you got, is the code up to date? Oh no, there's a new version of the SDK, don't do that, do this instead. What we would love is that you do what I did, and then you just have a button, like a scaffolding type thing. Like imagine you right mouse click and you say, add Azure storage event handler, right? And then it just does the stuff in your project that's required to get that to work. And so we have this working name for that, like smart scaffolding. And we kind of want this to be a thing beyond 3.0. This won't land in 3.0. This is a thing that we're thinking longer term. And this is how we kind of would evolve this type of application development so that rather than you having to go and do a bunch of documentation reading just to get the most basic hello world sort of cloud distributed computing based thing to work, the tooling would help you get there. And it wouldn't just be VS, obviously there'd be a command line experience for this as well. And so that's something it's extremely early thinking, but the things that we're building in 3.0 now are building blocks towards us adding this type of functionality in the future. So,
cool.
Yeah. So that's all I have time to show, really. We're an hour in. Does anyone have any questions online that they want me to answer in the next few minutes? guess I could just go and look now because I'm not actually presenting.
Yeah.
I
don't see any. We had some.
I saw some about Blazor and Razor components. Was there someone asking something about that?
That was about the workshop in London, and they were saying, I think.
Okay, I think there might have been a question very early. Here we go. What is the heck for renaming Blazor to components? So the quick story behind that. Blazor was the name that Steve coined when he built
I gotta go, I'm rebooting.
Okay,
Sorry.
man, no problem. Blazor was the name that Steve coined when he created the initial prototype, like 2.5 years ago, which melded a WebAssembly.NET runtime that he found on GitHub. It was a C.NET runtime that he ran through the WebAssembly compile chain to build a WebAssembly.NET runtime. And then he built a SPA framework on top of it. And he was, like browser and Razor, let's call it Blazor. And it's cool, and it kind of stuck. But when it came to saying, well, what are the steps to shipping that product, rather than just, let's just ship Blazor. Like, we can't just ship Blazor like that. Like, it's building a .NET runtime that runs in WebAssembly is a lot of work. But there's a lot of value in the component model and the programming model that Blazor brings. And so we said, why don't we ship that? Why can't we? It's already been architected and built the way that Steve did it and the team did it, so that those things are separate. You can run the Razor components engine anywhere, right? And we've seen examples where they run it in Electron with .NET Core instead of WebAssembly, and because everything's remoted. And so we said, well, why don't we just support the server-side Blazor, as it's called, in .NET Core 3, and then when the WebAssembly stuff comes online later on, then we can ship that with and people will only have to make very small changes to their apps if they want to run them in the client, because sometimes you don't want to. And so we and then separate to that, Ryan's the architect in MVC and Razor. We had always wanted, shortly after we did Tag Helpers, we'd always wanted to move Razor to a more component-focused system. We have view components in MVC in ASP.NET Core, but frankly, they're not great. We don't generally recommend people use them, and moving forward, we would very much tell people to use Razor components instead. What we wanted was the experience you get, the authoring experience you get with CS/HTML, coupled with the strong type and build system that you get with C#, right? Today in Razor, you don't get that. With tag helpers aren't referred to as a type, they're referred to with a directive where you have a string that gets parsed and stuff. And Razor does a good job of melding C# and HTML together in one file, but when you traverse multiple files, like view imports and view starts and layout files and things like that, the contract between those isn't strongly typed. Like, you pass data between a page and a layout in a bag, right? You say, here's the view context items, and you throw some data in it with the string, right? And then you pull it out again the other side. Blech, it's horrible, right? Like, it's been like that forever. It's been like that for 10 years. But we've always wanted to do more. And we said a component system where Razor was a little bit more like, XAML produces types, right? And you compile it and you get types out the other side, and types can refer to types. That's how Razor components works. That's how Blazor works. And so we took that and we shoved it into .NET Core 3 and support it running in ASP.NET Core on the server side. And then we said, well, great, how do you integrate Razor views and pages with Razor components? And we have a model for that as well. So Razor views/pages can host Razor components. So you can have a Razor component as a self-contained unit, like a component. That's what the term means, right? A component of UI. And you can just shove that inside a Razor view or a Razor page or a Razor layout. And we're also looking at doing the work to have a Razor component page share a layout with a standard Razor view or a standard Razor page, so that you can still use all these things together. So you can have, migrate over time, or just have parts of your apps use Razor components because it's a better programming model for that, but stick with Razor pages because you want to do request response. Because Razor components is a real-time stateful-based system, whereas Razor views and Razor pages are based on a request response style system, right? You have a model, it's bound incoming, you have an outgoing model, there's model validation and model validation errors and and you get a request context and blah, blah, blah. You don't get any of that in Razor components. Razor components assumes you have a connection. It uses a circuit, a component circuit as it's called, and everything's just stateful. You handle events, right? It doesn't know about requests and responses and stuff. It's designed to be a stateful UI system because you want it to run in a client. That's the whole point. Or if you're not running in the client, you want it to appear like it's running in the client over whatever connection mechanism you're using between where the rendering engine is and where the actual rendering occurs. And we're using Signaler for that in .NET Core 3. So yeah, that's the story. So we said when it comes to doing that, we don't want to call that Blazor because Blazor as a name in our mind refers to Razor component app model running in the browser on WebAssembly, whereas Razor components are the components that you build. You create a .razor file, which is coming in Preview 3, by the way. Create a .razor file, that gets compiled into a type, which is a Razor component type, and then you can host that either in a server-side application in .NET Core 3 or in a Blazor application in the client running on WebAssembly. So that's where the name difference comes from. That was a long answer.
We do have a few more questions. I don't know if you want to jump in.
I can quickly give some answers here. Are we going to see any new features, templates around hosting Vue.js since its popularity is increasing? For the most part, Node services is cutting it. No, we don't have any plans right now to add anything to the SPA stuff. We intend to remove. We did intend to remove the SPA templates from the SDK because we were finding they were just getting out of date too quickly because of the ship cycles and the servicing bar for .NET Core. It just wasn't a good match for the ship cycles of the SPA frameworks, and Node. So we would find we'd get 2 versions of Angular behind before we had a release of .NET Core where we could update those templates. But I think we're going to do a feature in 3.0 that's going to let us rev those templates out of band. And so you'll still be able to have an Angular template in the box, but we'll be able to update it, and it'll tell you when there's a new version and stuff. So we're hoping that's going to land. As for Vue, I haven't seen any data yet or any suggestion that warrants us to think that we should go and spend the time to add a Vue. Look, honestly, my honest opinion on this is that seems like something that is a great thing for the community to get behind. If there is a strong a strong set of community members who love using Vue with the Node services and the ASP.NET Core stuff that we have, then I'd encourage them, and we will promote them up the wazoo to put together a great template and a V6 extension that you can install and have those templates show up in the right place, and then you've got a great Vue template that's maintained by the people who use it. We did Angular and React and Redux because they were very clearly the most popular ones, and customers were were asking for them, and they were the logical ones to do when we built the features. Most of our time is spent building the stuff in 3.0 right now, and templates are quite expensive to maintain, to do well, especially for the ones that we have to include in the box. I'd go as far as saying that for the community projects that are maintaining templates, they don't have to quite go to the same lengths and the amount of work that we have to go to when we include a template. We have to put them through accessibility checking and localization and security checking and all these type of stuff. It's good practice to do all those things, but we have to do those things, and they're very expensive. And so keeping them up to date and assigning enough people to do that work, it can be difficult. Whereas perhaps a community project can get away with doing a little less work on that.
And because it's relatively easy to create a project template or a item template now, it's that is a nice thing where community actually can do it. Whereas in the past, creating a project template was so hard, right? But now it's really lightweight.
So Ian Clark asks, are you seeing any emerging common stack patterns for customers using .NET in production? For example, Razor Pages or MVC plus SQL Server, React, Angular, other SPA plus Web API, SQL Server, et cetera, et cetera. Yes and no. The reality is we see everything. We see everything. I wouldn't even attempt to try and say that there's a lovely acronym that turns into a word that we could say, oh yeah, we see the Fant stack or something. They're all over the place, right? F# plus Apache plus .NET plus Tensor. I don't know, I just made this up. We see customers doing everything. The reality is that once you have an application that's been in use for a while, or you're in a place that's gone through a series of cycles of application development thinking, you often end up with all different types of technologies. And I came from that world 10 years ago. That's what I did for a long time, and it wasn't unusual to have extremely heterogeneous environments where you had .NET talking to Oracle with some other enterprise service bus products coupled with some hardware device with an SDK coupled with blah blah blah, and before the cloud. Now you've got the cloud, then you add multiple cloud providers to those things and multiple SPA frameworks, and some customers like homogeny a little more, and so some customers will be a little more prescriptive, and they will ask for prescription, and we try to codify our prescription as the little that we give, typically in the templates, the experiences, and the documentation that we give, and then beyond that, it's really an exercise for the customer to decide what is best for them and their needs. And but we see people use all these things, all the above, and then a whole bunch of other things that I couldn't even hope to try and remember. So I'm sorry there isn't a cleaner answer to that. I mean, generally I would say start with what you see in the templates and what you see in the docs, and then branch out from there, especially into the community and what you see in shows like this where we highlight fantastic community efforts. And I would encourage folks that if they do adopt community libraries to really do that with the attitude of, I'm not a customer of this community project, I'm a participant in this community project, and that if I'm going to use this code, there is an onus on me to participate in improving this code and not log issues that say, why haven't you fixed this yet? So it's just some person sitting behind the keyboard, they're not some company, you didn't pay them any money. That's what community projects and open source is all about. So I'll get off my soapbox. What else? Blazor Electron sample. Yeah, there is a Blazor and Electron sample. There's a PR out right now to move that to the ASP Labs repo. It exists. It's been around for a while. There is a Blazor and Electron sample. If you go to the ASP Labs repo, I believe there's an open PR right now, if it has not already been merged, that has that in there. Maxima asks, are there any updates to the identity server out-of-the-box integration for 2.2 or 3.0? The update is, I saw an email yesterday where I believe Brock and Dominic, the identity server folks, have some sample of a new thing that they're doing that they wanted to show us, and then we were going to review what we've built with them. We had initially planned to get previews of that out to use on top of 2.2. That might still be the case, but given where we are in the 3.0 cycle, depending on the outcome of the next round of feedback on that integration piece that we've done, we may make the decision to just roll that into the 3.0 timeline instead. I'll reserve judgment on that yet because it's still in flight. But the code does exist, the templates do exist, they're just not in a released form yet. So I've seen, for example, the new SPA templates that include the identity server or the jot token auth-based system for Angular and for React that will auth with an ASP.NET Core server that's hosting identity server plus the glue piece that we created. So it does exist. It is being worked on. It had a bit of a break over the holiday period because the developer involved moved and wasn't available for a little bit, but we're back on that now, and hopefully we'll have more news on that shortly.
Cool.
Watching live. Anything new with progressive web apps? PWAs. Nothing specific. PWAs are great. It comes up in the context of Blazor quite a bit. There is opportunity in PWA, definitely, where we could do more things. We haven't had a lot of customer ask. There hasn't been a lot of customer demand to really have us put more PWA-focused stuff in the offering, so like APIs or templates or anything. Most of it today, you just build a web app and then you go and add some manifests and a little bit of code and an endpoint in the server for your service workers and stuff. I think Mads Christensen may have created a template at one point a couple of years back for PWAs in the earlier time. But we don't have any plans to do anything more than what's happening right now. But when Blazor goes a little more, when we get to the point where Blazor starts having official previews, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more asks for PWAs in the context of those, because obviously it's going to be a different story when you've got the actual .NET code running in the client. It'll be interesting to see what folks do. When do we get our VB.NET ASP.NET Core support? That's a complicated question. So there are templates that exist today that will let you build like MVC controller APIs or basic middleware stuff in VB, and you can do it right now. Like it totally works. The VB support in .NET Core to date isn't very good. It's not full VB support. That's changing in 3.0. So 3.0 is bringing more full-fledged VB support as you would expect, like the my namespace and all the other VB isms that just don't work on .NET Core today, because we have to bring those over to make VB WinForms and VB WPF applications possible to port to .NET Core. What will never happen, what we have stated is that we have no intention of ever doing, is doing a VB Razor. So Razor, when it comes to building web applications and ASP.NET Core applications, Razor will always be C#. And so you will not get a VB.NET web application template that has Razor that's VB. And the problem with having a template where the code is VB and the views are Razor is that now you've got two languages running in the same project system in OmniSharp or Visual Studio, and that's not supported. There's no support for that today. The only project system that supported that in Visual Studio was the old ASP.NET website project system, which actually allowed you to have different folders with .vb files and .cs files, and that would actually work. But that doesn't work in the project system. And so even if you do that today, your Razor files it is one or the other. It has to be a VB project or a C# project. It can't be both, right? And so you have to pick one, and then you'll get IntelliSense for that language and that language only. So it's just not something that it's not enough people who would do that to warrant the work it would take to make that work. That's sort of our official position on that right now. Speaking of templates, is there a plan to have templates based on MSAL for Azure AD v2 endpoint? I saw an email about that this week. So I believe we're currently discussing with that team what the best approach is for changing our MSA and AAD authentication story with regards to our templates and libraries to be, whether it should be just be OpenID Connect based or whether it should still be a wrapper library of some sort, that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and based on MSAL. So we're looking at that right now. I don't have firm plans yet, but it's something that we are looking at. Blazor 1.0, yeah, I don't have any dates for Blazor 1.0. It'll be after 3.0, and we don't know. We just don't know. Blazor 1.0 depends on the WebAssembly story for .NET, and that's still very much a work in progress. When we know, we will let you know. Okay, any chance for proper sample of docs of using a client framework, Angular React with social auth and ASP.NET and identity? So that's effectively what the template that's currently being worked on for the identity server integration is going to allow you to do. Now, the identity server folks have those docs, is my understanding. So you should be able to go to the identity server repo and do that. We don't have the support in the framework to do what you're asking right now. That's what we're building, because we don't have the authentication mechanisms for authenticating SPA applications. If you're using cookie auth to do your SPA application, which is okay, as long as you take the right precautions, then you can do this already, but there probably isn't a good walkthrough or sample for that. So I mean, that's something that we could potentially do, but it effectively is just, you start with a standard application with your server-based social authentication, so Facebook auth or whatever it might be, and then you add the SPA application into the same one, and then you share the cookie. That's basically it. Now, then like what you do in the SPA application to do authorization is where it gets, we don't have anything, Angular doesn't have anything, like that's kind of always left as an exercise to the reader, but in the new template that's coming out, we actually do build like a little mini framework in the Angular app and a lot less in the React app because it's simpler to do that. And so there's a thing that will do the outgoing auth check and then do the redirect if it has to, and it does the right thing. So stay tuned, there is more on that coming. And then that old nugget, it would be good to have a template that supports globalization best practices out of the box. Yes, I've heard that asked for 15 years. Again, it's one of those things, I'll refer to my previous answer where we have the localization system in the box. There is no template. I did maintain a sample at one point for ASP.NET Core. It's still there. It's in the entropy repo, wherever it might be. And I think I have said this numerous times. That is another great example, I think, of where a community template, a community project that maintains our templates but fully localized versions of those with all the changes required to make them localized would be a fantastic community project for folks to own. It's just something we haven't been able to prioritize when it comes down to the amount of work required to do it to the standard that we would have to do it to include it in the box. And it's like there's no WinForms template that's localized. There's no WPF template that's localized. Like we're not unique in that way.
We have seen some good community efforts in that. There's recently I shared some. Damien Bowden did a series and has a GitHub repo, and it's using identity has been localized. And they've gone through and they've had pull requests like Chinese and all different languages and stuff. Yeah. So again, that localization is a good area for community to jump in and do that.
Right.
And it seems interesting too. That's something where people could potentially with Razor components also do some localization. Not Razor class library. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
So anyhow.
So Destination Dub's just following up on his question regarding the auth of social auth. Yeah, so that's what we're building. That's exactly what we're building, which is where you have an API application that is secured using identity server and is using JOT tokens, and then you have a SPA application that needs to authenticate with that. That is literally the templates that are currently being built. So stay tuned. All right, that's it.
We're like super long.
We're
We've
over.
gone for many hours.
Yeah, all the hours. There's a question over on Twitch. How usually they secure an RPC call compared to normal HTTP. So my understanding, I asked the security question, this is the last one I'll answer, but I asked the security question with gRPC, and the answer I got back was, you don't do that. gRPC, they typically, it's over HTTP, so you can secure it using whatever you use to secure the HTTP2 channel, which could be certificate auth. You do it over HTTPS, and you do certificate auth for authentication, those type of things. But it's kind of intended more for RPC style scenarios where both sides trust each other. Now, I may be wrong. Maybe I got the wrong information, I heard it wrong. So if people on the stream know more, by all means correct me. But gRPC is over HTTP. It's HTTP2, but it kind of takes over the connection, right? So like the pathing of each request is used to resolve which gRPC endpoint or method to call. But the authentication, it would be, and if that's true, then the authentication would typically be done at the transport layer, right? So you would use certificate auth or something like that. So that's my understanding. If anyone has a deeper understanding of that, which I'm sure many people do, feel free to answer that. All right, we're done.
Hooray!
I need to try and get in here every week. I mean, stuff comes up, but I always enjoy coming in and answering all the questions and showing stuff.
Hey, maybe we can rope David in next week.
Yeah, I'll keep reminding him and punching him in the arm, and we'll see if I can get it in. Maybe I'll just send him a meeting and not tell him what it is and get it on his calendar.
There it is, a meeting request.
And then I'll drag him over. Okay. All right, thanks everybody. We will see you next week.
I'm dramatically zooming out.
Dramatic zoom out and hit the stop stream button. Bye.